Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. I'm Randall Carlisle. My co-host is Rachel Santizo. Our guest is Jacob Kenison. And did I say your name right?
Yeah.
Okay. We've never met before, so you just guessed because you have it written down.
Good job.
Before we get to Jacob, I just got some really interesting news about how many people we have reached in January and you never know when people are watching the podcast, in January of 2023.
Oh, how many?
105,000.
Really?
Yes.
That is
That's
a big number. That's fantastic.
So if you're one of the 105,000 out there, we thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And we'd ask you if it's on iTunes, like us and send us a review.
Yes.
And somebody, I facilitate a family support group, and we have some loyal viewers on YouTube. And one of them is Rosalita. She watches every single podcast we do. Okay. And she said, I watch it on YouTube. So how can I let you know that I like the podcast?
Okay.
And Matt, our producer, says somewhere on the screen, there's a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Just say you like it. But the really cool thing would be to hit subscribe. And then that lets YouTube know that, Rosalita, you're a regular viewer. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Can you leave a comment on YouTube?
I don't think so.
You
can.
You can?
Matt's shaking his head.
Just
yes.
kidding. Okay. You can leave a comment.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, Rosalita, tell us you love us or you hate us. Whatever.
It's true.
It's true. Matter.
Please tell us how you really feel. Exactly.
So our guest is Jacob. You lined him up.
I did. And actually, Jacob has been a follower. And so when we asked for comments on the show, Jacob reached out to me on LinkedIn and gave us one.
Oh.
And so he had told us, he's the one that I told you about, that said he thinks that it should be longer.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I know a couple of people that you guys interviewed, and they have so much more of their story.
Right.
Because I mean, a half hour is pretty quick with three people.
Well, part of our debate when we put together, we could go an hour,
sure,
or we could go 15 minutes, or we could do whatever. Yeah. And we've just found just from doing some research and everything that 30 minutes seems to be the length of time that people will stick around for a podcast. So that's why we do it. You're right. I mean, every single person, I'm sure, including you, could go on for a couple hours about your story. Sure. And the whole point of our podcast is to let people know a little more, if they don't already, about addiction and recovery. And hopefully that will help continue to erase the stigma of addiction. So tell us your story. Well, and you got to do it in like 27 minutes.
7 minutes.
Yeah.
My story is it's the same as everybody else's. You guys hear. I feel like my addiction started super early, way before I ever drank and used. I had those addictive behaviors that got me in a lot of trouble before I ever drank and used. I went to prison at 18 before I had ever even tried alcohol or beer or smoked a cigarette or anything.
Really?
What did you go to prison for? I
went to prison for a bunch of animal rights stuff.
Really?
So when I was asking you earlier about being on the news, when I was 15, we burned a leather store down and broke into a bunch of mink farms.
I remember.
So I was the fall guy for all that. The only one they could get enough evidence to put in prison, and so they made an example. And so I went to prison when I was 18. Wow. I was the youngest person that was involved with it, but it's one of those in recovery, right? I understand I had a part in it and I'm okay with it. And honestly, it made me where I'm at today. And I couldn't see my life any other way. So, but going to prison at 18 was interesting because those are some pretty big years as far as development and like friendships and it just changed my world drastically, right? And my cellie in prison was a heroin addict. He was a lifetime heroin addict. He shot heroin every day in his cell.
In his cell?
Oh, yeah.
How did you do that?
very creatively. So I went to federal prison in Phoenix, and they steal the needles from the med room or make them out of like, there's some weird things that happen in prison. The bottom of a milk, so the milk comes in big bags, right? They put it up in this dispenser and they cut off the end of it, and it's just a tube, but it's sealed at the end. So somehow they get that needle and melt the tube to the end of the needle, which then turns it into a suction, right? We find a way.
And where do they get the heroin?
Oh, that's the easy part. There's lots of ways that comes in.
Guards,
people smuggling in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
It was an interesting world.
Okay.
That's a whole separate story.
So you
that
go
needs to
into
be longer.
prison being a non-user at 18,
Yep.
and you're advocating animal rights.
Yep.
And so what did you learn in prison? Did you learn to use drugs or?
I didn't learn to use drugs. I learned that drugs were not what I thought they were. I was raised in Utah and in the predominant religion. And in my mind, if you used heroin or meth, you were a madman running naked down the street with your hair on
Right.
fire. That was just my thought of it. And I had a pretty big stance against it as well, like using. I didn't know why, but I watched him shoot heroin every day, and all he did was shoot heroin, either go work out or sit on his bed and read. And I realized, like, he's not a demon. He's not some crazy madman. He's just a dude reading on his bed, you know? And so I went through prison that whole time, and I actually smoked weed for my first time in prison. And my cellie gave it to me. He had to smuggle in weed to sell heroin because politics in prison says white people can't bring heroin in. They have to bring marijuana in. So he smuggled marijuana in to sell to support his heroin addiction. So he gave me that. So all I did was go to sleep. I did not want to be awake for anything. I slept as much as I could in prison. So I got out, and my friend group at that time had started drinking, which was a big change for me as well. But I'd become desensitized to it. So started drinking, and I was off to the races pretty quick. I found out a girl I was hanging out with was using meth. I stole her bag. I ran into the bathroom and said, if you don't tell me how to do it, I'm going to find a way to do it. So she showed me how to do it.
A determined person.
That's right. Yeah. So, my addiction just moved really fast. And from
How old were
18,
you?
I was probably 20 at that point.
Okay.
Probably 20. So from 18 to 26, I spent in and out of prison. I spent 6 out of 8 years in prison.
On
Were they
drug-related
drug-
stuff?
After that, it was mostly either drug-related or behavior-related.
Okay.
I was a young knucklehead that didn't want to be on probation, So
Now he's a grown-up knucklehead.
That's right. That's right. So somehow I graduated off of probation and parole, strung out on heroin.
Were you in Phoenix or were you here?
I was here.
Okay.
So Utah doesn't have a federal prison, so they have to farm everybody out to other states. And I also went to state prison in there as well.
Okay.
But that's kind of where my addiction really, really took off, because I didn't have anybody looking over my shoulder. I had no reason to follow any guidelines or listen to anybody. I was free for the first time in a long time. And I actually wasn't free, right? I was addicted to heroin. So I did everything in up and down that you could think of to supply that habit. Try and get sober every other week, robbing, stealing, cheating, lying, the typical addiction story, right? And in that track, I had three pretty serious suicide attempts. One I should never have walked again from. I was in a coma. I went off a 3-story building. Was in a wheelchair for 3 weeks, and then got arrested, went back to prison. And
Have you always struggled with mental health?
I was
during your
diagnosed with
addiction?
depression pretty young.
Okay.
Yeah. I knowing kind of what I know now about mental health, I'm pretty sure I had some pretty outrageous ones.
Yeah, 'cause
Like
think
I was
it's-
pretty antisocial as a child and definitely exhibited that behavior. And I think had they done the testing, they would have seen that.
Yeah, I think it's important to bring up the mental health.
Sure.
If it's situational or if you're diagnosed with mental health as well, and if you have it now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how you deal with it.
Jumping off a 3-story building is a pretty serious attempt at
Right.
taking your
Correct.
life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So-
And then, one of the times I was in jail, I got in a fight. I was coming off of meth and I stole this guy's food because I was starving. I felt like I was starving. And got in a fight over it and I beat him up and I got put in the hole and they put me in the hole with all my stuff and they're not supposed to do that. And I broke a razor apart and I slit my wrists and long story, ended up at the ER getting stitches and then another one was a purposeful overdose. I was trying to shoot a bunch of heroin and coke, wouldn't work, couldn't overdose on it, couldn't get enough in my system and took 4 bottles of Tylenol PM. Ended up in somebody's garage rifling through their stuff. I don't remember it, and then passed out in their front yard. Ended up in the hospital again
Thanks
in
for
liver
being
failure.
so upfront and vulnerable about that.
Yeah.
I think that takes a lot of courage to talk about that.
Yeah.
Those are big parts of my story.
And how did you finally seek
It's
recovery?
right.
I mean,
That's-
Long run, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
in that time, that whole time, I was never really happy as an addict or happy in general, right? I just was trying to get sober. I would get 2 weeks or a month or 6 months, and I'd relapse and go back down the road. And eventually, I moved to New York. Got sober enough to move to New York. Got strung out in New York. Met what is now my wife out there, and she got pregnant. So I really, really didn't want my son to be born when I was using. That was a big one for me. So I was able to get sober. I was sober for his birth. I don't know that I was necessarily present. I was sober. I can notch that one off, but I relapsed pretty quickly afterwards because I wasn't working a program or had any solid base. So blew all of our money. We were about to be homeless in New Jersey at that time. And my wife reached out to a friend of ours and said, "Hey, Jake really needs some help." And this guy he didn't really know me. I tell this story only because it really impacts and shows how much he was committed to recovery. I had dated his his wife. I had dated her for a long time. He had met me once. He said, "Okay, I'm going to put him on a flight. I'll pay for him to get into treatment." And he was going to fly me back that night. Right? He didn't know me from Adam.
Wow.
And was it back here?
Yeah, back to Utah.
I love
And
kind people.
and I told him I'm a manipulative addict. So I said, "Hey, I can't go without my newborn and my soon-to-be wife, And so he said, "Okay, they're on the same flight. Let's go." So he paid for my entire
Jeez.
family to come out. As I came out, the facility he had looked at sold my bed or booked my bed, whatever happened. So I ended up going to Cirque Lodge. Not the facility I ever thought I would end up at, right? Let alone ever be able to pay for it because I didn't pay for it. He paid for the first 30 days and Cirque gave me a scholarship for the last 60. So I stayed for 90 days.
And for those of you who don't know, if you just Google Cirque Lodge, you'll see what kind of facility it is, and to say it's nice is an understatement.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. Yeah, it was
And
everything you could hope
must
for
have
to
been
go to treatment.
surprised
Yeah,
when you-
that's right.
and you had never seen it before,
No.
right?
No, I mean, I'd heard about it. I'd been in meetings and circles and seen Lindsay Lohan coming from.
That's, yeah.
You know,
that's what I
so-
think of.
Yeah, it had an image, and I didn't belong there as far as financially, right?
Right.
I was a different type of person than other people there, and they were actually concerned about it because of my history. And but I got there, and I remember the guy that paid for me to go there. He said, "I have 3 words: do your steps, follow the people that are winners, and stay away from the people that are losers." Right? And that's kind of blunt, whatever,
Yeah, but good advice.
it is,
you know.
and I got in there and I just went to work, right? Because I was really broken and I was really hungry and I really wanted to be sober, and I got sober and I left, and I relapsed actually when I left. I used one day and then got back on the horse and restarted my date and started working, right? I went right back to it. I was not the epitome of a good sobriety picture when I left. I left treatment and went and worked at a nightclub in downtown because that was my skill set, right?
Good environment.
Yeah, great environment. I had a family to support. I had to make money, and I didn't have any other way. So I did that, and I started working at a gym, and I started working at the time it was called NLR, and it's what actually kind of bled into FTR.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
that's how I kind of met that connection in the recovery world, which was really cool.
Oh.
Actually, kind of James that was there.
Yeah.
He asked me to come with him when he went there, and I went to Cirque instead. So there was like a weird split point there.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so I went to Cirque a year later after I got sober. I started at Cirque. Yeah. And started at the bottom. Was a frontline worker, just a tech, and worked into their experiential department where I take their lodge facility, which is kind of the really high price. They have two facilities. I take that facility out hiking and biking and snowshoeing and CrossFit and you name it. We go try and do it. We go bowling. We're in our giant ropes course that we have on site. And I got to see what it was like to be there for other people, right? Because that's really what sobriety taught me, was that for me to stay sober, I have to be there for other people. Otherwise, I go down a dark path when I'm not. Right? Service is what really meant happiness for me.
I agree.
So on that track, I started my college career. I had never done anything. I started at UVU, and I've been going for the last 6 years now, straight working. And so this next semester, I graduate with my MSW.
Right.
So
Congratulations.
I got to ask you about this
know.
guy who virtually saved your life and shelled out a lot of money.
Yeah.
What did you ever correspond with him?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I still talk to him a lot, actually. He's involved in the recovery industry. He's an interventionist now and doing this. He has his own little separate company that has sober companions and stuff. And I can't, I've never offered to pay back, but I don't think he expects me to pay back. I think what he's hoping is that I can stay sober and share the message, because that's really all he wanted.
I mean, it's amazing that even though you said you met him once and you dated his wife before she became his wife, I presume.
Yep.
Yes. And for him to just offer something like that,
It's that pay it forward.
It's a lot. It's huge.
It's almost like a miracle in your life.
I agree. It was. And that I always feel bad like telling that story, like, I dated his ex, blah, blah. But it shows how willing he was to help another person. And I think that's huge.
I think it's the power of community too, though.
Exactly.
And the power of recovery, like forgiveness, resentments, like all the things. Like once you just let your guard down and become human and vulnerable, that's what this is all about. That's why all three of us are even sitting here in the first place, is because of that, because we all have a past, or we all have exes, or we all have pain, or we all have love too, and service and all the different things. And so that's really what it represents. So I think saying that is the power of the story.
Absolutely.
Really. So
that's a great, I mean, it's an amazing story. That's one of the best I've heard. I mean, without him, where would you be?
Right. It's a good question.
What do you think?
Scary.
I have no idea. I don't think I'd be in Utah, because I definitely didn't have money to get from New York or the East Coast here. Maybe I would have made my way back here. I definitely wouldn't be married and have a 9-year-old son in my life and be working in a treatment center, about to become a therapist. Like that story would be very different, right?
Right.
Whether it would still be on the track or not, it would be different. He saved my life.
What do you communicate to your son about what you've been through?
Everything.
He knows everything.
He knows everything. I don't hide anything from him. I thought that it wasn't going to do him any justice. The life I live is very open, and he's went to meetings when he was 9 months old, and he's been going to meetings since then. So, he's one of those.
What's his name?
Dillinger.
Hi, I'm
Oh, that's
Dillinger,
cute.
and I'm the son of an addict.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can see
It's
it
your
in the
Al-Anon meeting
meeting.
waiting to happen. So, yeah, I mean, he knows all about mental health. He hears about suicide. We talked to him about that. I'm a pretty big advocate as far as like, the more he knows, the more likely he is to react properly in a situation where it comes up.
Sure.
You know, I don't think it would do him any good to know that if he heard something down the line that dad had done in the past or about all this life I had lived before he was born, if he didn't know about it before he heard it, it could really hurt him, you know? So
What a lot of the people watching or listening to this podcast are in recovery or thinking about recovery. What message would you give to people who are just curious about addiction and recovery?
ask questions. I mean, people think that, at least not, I mean, for a long time, addiction was something you kept behind the sheet, right? It was not something that was talked about at the dinner table. It was Aunt June has a drinking problem. That's just Aunt June, right? It's not, man, Aunt June really needs some help. How can we help her? What are our resources? Who do we reach out to? How do we get, find information? And when those family units come together is when things happen. Ask questions. I've been through a lot I've been through more in sobriety, I feel like, than I have been through in my youth. We had to put my father in a home for early onset dementia. My sister passed away from her addiction during that. So going from the person that always needed help to the person that can now be of support and give help is huge in my world. Like that, it means everything. So being able to just put that message out there for people to grab, I think you just have to talk about things. Mental health and addiction are not going to go away, and they're getting worse. The stats show it. Everything is out there. It's just breeding and breeding and breeding and breeding. So
what would you say for the incarcerated, for individuals that just keep having that cycle of prison and having those barriers, the backgrounds, like what would you say to them, how to break those barriers for employment, for housing?
It's funny. I never had a problem with employment. Not once did I ever get turned away from a job because of my past.
Really?
Not once. At least that I ever knew of. I'm sure I didn't get called back maybe, but I never went in for an interview and had I never would mark yes, where you have to mark yes or no to your conviction.
Okay.
I'd always leave it blank and would put will explain. So I would either go into my interview and explain it if they asked, or they would just not call me because I left it open. So I don't know if I missed opportunities.
Maybe that's it.
I would say you just have to fight, and it's all about presentation, right? If you go in like a thug with, you've been up all night partying and you smell like cigarettes and, whatever, and you can at least like dress somewhat in a manner that shows that you care about yourself.
Yeah.
People are going to expect that from you, and it's sad, but that's kind of the way the world works. And you just what I would say to those people is reach out, right? Like find somebody. There's so many resources out there now. FTR is great for that because it's involved with the young people and, USARA and all those places. Like there's so much information and support if you want it, but you have to be willing to break that tie, right? You have to be able to walk away from the abusive relationship or the gang that you're a part of, or whatever else is keeping you in that addictive or sick cycle.
Yeah.
And until you start actually being proactive for yourself, it's not going to come.
Yeah. The bottom line, and I've said this so many times, and I think I'm right after watching clients coming in and going at Odyssey. It doesn't matter whether it's Odyssey or First Step or Cirque or whatever. If you don't want it, the program's not going to work.
Right.
If you do want it, the program's going to work.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, and it's that old saying, like, let us love you until you can love yourself, right? Like, just stay there. Let the magic work. Even if you don't believe in it, don't fight against it. Just enough to just like hear the message, right? But
what's your favorite thing about working at Cirque? Because you went into Cirque, you're like, I don't even know what to do with my hands, right? Like it was some type of different world for you.
Yeah.
What is your favorite thing about working there now? Because I don't know Cirque, so it'd be the same thing for me. So I'm curious.
I think it would be the same. You can replace Cirque with treatment center. Like it really doesn't matter. And I think it would be the same. It's that light bulb comes on where where you see somebody actually start like either getting it or caring about themselves, or like that little glimmer of like hope is so cool to watch. Like watching people come in emaciated and like zero skin color and like hair's falling out because they haven't had minerals and vitamins for so long. So like 30 days later or 60 or 90 days later, and like their hair's cut, they're like standing up tall, they're smiling, they're laughing, they have color, and like they talk about what they're gonna do. Like it's so cool to watch. Like, and I mean, anywhere in the industry, I think you would see that, whether it's FTR or even just in, you know, marketing or whatever. Like you see those changes happen if you're around people long enough to see them from the beginning to the middle to like the next stage to the next, you know. So.
And there's a lot of burnout though in working with addiction. Because there's a lot of people who the light doesn't come on in their eyes, and they go back out to whatever their life is. And how do you deal with that? I mean, because nobody's 100% successful.
Right.
So somebody that you cared about in the program that you worked hard with, and then you see the light go out in their eyes and they take off. How do you deal with that?
I think that for me, I just know that they meant everything they said when they were in treatment. They thought they were going to stay sober, right? They meant it. Like when they said, I am done. I'm on this path, right? Whether they fought it the whole time or they were at the 90-day mark and they left and had all this stuff lined up, yet they went out and overdosed and died, right? Those are really hard because I was that guy at one point.
Right.
And I know I was telling people the truth. I am not using again. I am done. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to get a family. Like I'm going to do all these things. So I just have to remember that they're just sick, right? We're all sick. The biggest thing for me is like detachment from that. Like work is work. My recovery is my recovery. And my time, my free time is my free time. Like I have to have some things for me. Like I went back to doing jujitsu when I went back to school. And so for me, getting my black belt in jiu-jitsu is like a journey separate from all of that is my self-care. Like when I need to go check out, when I need to like, I've had a hard day at work or some, you know, antisocial kid is like testing me at work. I say, okay, I have to go, you know, and my wife knows like, you can see it. She can see it. She knows like when I miss the gym, she'll say, when was the last time you went to jiu-jitsu? Like she'll know, you know, like,
honey, it's time for jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. And so, you know, burnout is there, but I think it's par for the course. And I think that's why so many addicts and people with mental health issues get into the field is because we've already lived it. I've been living this for, you know, 30 years now. It didn't change it. I'm just on the other side of it and actually maybe helping people instead of definitely hurting people, for me at least.
What do you do for your recovery besides jujitsu? I can never say it right. Are you a black belt now? You said you're working towards it.
No,
but you're
purple belt. So
what's
like
next?
The step brown, black. Jiu-jitsu takes way longer than getting your college degree, which is the unfortunate part.
I didn't know that.
So yeah, it takes on average like 10 years to get your black belt in jiu-jitsu.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And
does your son go with you?
No, he hates it.
Oh, he does. That's okay then. Okay.
He's not that kid.
Okay.
And it's okay. I tried really hard, but leaving with him in tears was not worth it. So,
okay, that makes sense. Okay.
Our 30 minutes are up, believe it or
Wow.
not. So you're right. You could go on forever and ever, but you know, I personally want to thank you for all the good you're doing now, and for sharing your story with us.
Yeah.
Good job inviting.
I know.
Inviting
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
I wish there were more people like the man you met who helped you out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So if you're out there and you have some money and you know somebody dealing with addiction, this is a good story.
Yeah. 100%.
Good luck in the future.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rachel. See you next week.
Yes, you will.
Okay. On time?
On time.
Oh, sorry.
It's a
I was really
background
late
story.
today. Yeah, it was horrible.
We hope to see you next week or have you listen to us again. So thank you for watching another edition of Odyssey House Journals.